197. Rabbi Chaim David Halevy has a unique introduction to most halachot, but specifically to the halachot of fasting. The purpose of a fast. Why do we fast? What's the point of fasting? What's the point of not fasting if a person can't fast? So what does the fast day become for them if they can't fast? Everyone has their own understandings of mitzvot, of course. Rabbi Chaim David Halevy wants to contribute to the greater conversation, which the Rambam encourages us to try to find rational reasons for the things that we do. These don't necessarily mean that it's the only reason, that it's the only Jewish understanding of why we do something. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a mitzvah. It's a divine commandment. Whether we understand it or don't, it's a mitzvah. Nonetheless, we still have an obligation. We're encouraged to try to bridge the gap between what we do and what we understand what we're doing. And this brings us to page 197. Some of these ideas you may have heard before, and others may be new in context. Tzom u'matarato, chapter 106. Fasts and the purpose of a fast. Mevod hilchot ta'anit, an introduction to the laws of fasting. Mitzvat hatzom meforeshet b'Torah ach pa'am echad bilvad. The mitzvah to fast appears in the Torah explicitly only once. Where? Regarding which fast day?
Yom Kippur.
Very good, Yom Kippurim. B'chodesh ha-Shiviti ba'asor lachodesh ta'anu et nafshatechem. On the 7th month, on the 10th day of that month, you should afflict your souls. Ki bayom hazeh yechaper alechem. Because on this day, your averot will be atoned for. Meforeshet ha-mitzvah umforash ta'ama. The mitzvah is explicit to fast. What's explicit is also the reason for this mitzvah. Hatzom ba b'yom ha-kapara al chet. Fasts are introduced on days which are meant to atone for sins. For there's no good word in English for a chet, an avera, a avon, a pesha. All the words that we'll use to translate those Hebrew words are going to sound very Christian, and the reason is because they're Christian. Iniquities, sins, wrongdoings, evil doings, all kinds of things like that. Those are not Jewish words. So normally I'll try to translate chet, avon, pesha just by using the Hebrew word chet, avon, pesha, and you'll understand already what that means from that. So on a day where we need to have kapara, atonement for a chet, is the day where a fast comes. Umikan sheyesh kesher barur ben hatzom ve'kapara. And from here you find there is a direct link between tzom, fasting, and kapara, atonement. You know, in general, the fact that we translate Torah, it's important. It's an important thing. Why is it important? Because you need to understand what you're doing, and you understand what you're studying. How many people learn Torah? They have no idea what they're reading. So we translate. That's the purpose of translation. But we have to also be aware of the limitation of translation. The limitation of translation is not just what many others have said before me, greater than me, have said about the limitations of translation. It's not just that you lose the flowery essence. It's not that there's something more. When you use another nation's language to understand the Torah, ultimately you are studying the Torah through the context of that nation. If you use English to understand the Torah, you are resorting to Christian understandings of the Torah. It's not malicious. It's not somebody's fault. It's the same thing with Arabic. When you use Arabic words to understand the Torah, you're going to be falling into certain languages or certain words that are reminiscent of another faith. And therefore the greatest way to study Torah would be to study in the language of the Torah. It's for that reason that our Chachamim were so adamant when they study Torah, when they learn Torah, to learn it in its original language. You know, I finished today our Kenes Rabbanim, a rabbinic conference of Sephardic rabbis. We meet every year. I haven't been to Yerushalayim with them in a number of years, since 2017, but we studied together. This year nobody was able to go to Yerushalayim, so we studied together over Zoom, which was very unique because What it allowed for this year was the opportunity for rabbis who otherwise wouldn't be able to join us to be part of these meetings. And we spent time, myself, Ben Zaken, some of the rabbis that you might know who were there. We spent time studying the texts of different Sephardic Chachamim, with different lecturers, different Chachamim, different professors. And the fascinating thing is we're talking about rabbis in San Diego, in Los Angeles, in New York, rabbis in Seattle, rabbis in Turkey, rabbis in Canada, rabbis in Mexico, rabbis in Israel, rabbis in Argentina, rabbis from many, many different countries. And when we sit and study together, we speak in only one language. We speak in Hebrew. And even though that's not the native language of most of the people there, that Hebrew is always colored with an accent from somewhere else, but that's the language that unites us. That's a common language between all of us, between Chachamim. That's the way that Chachamim from Morocco and Yemen they speak two different types of Arabic. We're able to correspond with each other alongside rabbis from Russia and Poland and Lithuania. Because what language do we write in? We write Hebrew. Hebrew is not just about Israel. It's not just about Zionism. Hebrew is the language of the Jewish people. To understand things correctly, we have to understand them in the context of Hebrew. It's a very special thing. I've been part of many different rabbinic dialogues, and always we resort to the most comfortable language, English. But in this group of uniquely Sephardic Chachamim, we only speak Hebrew. Sometimes we'll add an English word or two here. You slip, you have to say something. But we write together in Hebrew, we read together in Hebrew, we even text each other in Hebrew, WhatsApp messages in Hebrew. Very rarely do we transition to the language of the nations around us. We find when the Jews go to war against the Pilishtim, and they first do teshuvah before they go to war. Like it says, they remove the idols. They gathered together in the mitzvah and they say, we've sinned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And they fast. Before they go to war, they fast, and alongside fasting, they do teshuvah. Teshuvah and fasting go hand in hand together. הרי שבא הצום בשעת צרה, כן יום הכיפורים, תשובה צום וידוי דברים. The fast comes at any difficult situation. We fast alongside doing teshuvah. וכך מפורש ביואל. And this is explicitly mentioned in the Navi Yoel. שובו עדיי בכל לבבכם, בצום ובכי ובמספד. Return with your hearts, with fasting, with crying, with mourning. V'shuvu al Adonai, and return to Hashem, the Prophet Yoel says. So again, you see fasting always comes along in context with teshuvah. It's not just a fast on its own. It's not just teshuvah on its own. It's teshuvah and fasting going hand in hand. ומצאנו גם באומות העולם. We find that not only Jews are unique in this ability, this practice of fasting to do teshuvah. כאשר שמעו אנשי נינווה, עוד 40 יום ונינווה נהפכת. When the people of Nineveh, were they Jewish? No, we read about Nineveh when? On which holiday?
Kippur.
Yom Kippurim, very good. We read about Nineveh in the story of Nineveh. Ne'emar, it says there, when they realize that time is running out. V'yaminu anshe Nineveh, v'yikre'u tzom, the people of Nineveh believe and they call a fast. V'yiga hadavar and melech Nineveh, and the word of this reaches the king of Nineveh. V'yizak v'yomar, and he cries out and he says, Ha'adam, man, al yit'amu me'uma, don't eat. If you remember there, it also says, don't drink. וישובו איש מדרכו הרעה ומן החמאס אשר בכפיהם. A people should return from the evil, from the chamas, which is in chapehem, which is in their actions. People have to do teshuvah. If our end is near, we fast, and we do teshuvah. That's the way Jews deal with problems. We don't just fast on its own. Fast always comes along in the context of teshuvah. Ach, nonetheless, says Rabbi Chaim Halevy, כנראה שכבר בימים קדומים קראו צום ושכחו את עיקר שהיא התשובה. It already is an old problem in the Jewish people where we call for fasts, and the Jewish people seem to forget that the reason behind the fast is the aspect of teshuvah. ושאין כל ערך לצום ללא תשובה. Then really there is no value to a fast which is not accompanied with teshuvah. So you don't eat. Tomorrow night comes in. You don't eat for 25 hours. And you spend the 25 hours laying in bed with air conditioning. You pray all the tefillot. Aside from that, you're okay. Did you fast? Yes. Was it worth anything? No. Because a fast must be accompanied by teshuvah. One without the other is useless. היה זה ערב חורבן ירושלים בבית הראשון. If you remember, it's the eve of the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. Who's the prophet in this period? Right before the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash? We're gonna... Who? Very good, Yirmiyahu. I think I still have a book on Yirmiyahu that belongs to you, Rachel. ומתוך מסורת באומה, and because of a tradition of the Jewish people, לקרוא צום בעת צרה, to call for a fast every time of trouble. עשו כן גם אז, they continued tradition, Jewish tradition, we're struggling, the Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, let's fast. ולכן ציווה ירמיה על ברוך בן נריה, Yirmiyah commands Baruch ben Neriah with the following words: "Ubata, you should come vekarata b'megillah shekatavta mipi et divrei Adonai beoznei ha'am b'yom tzom." Yirmiyah was hiding. If you remember, Yirmiyah couldn't come out to the Jewish people, so he's hiding, and he tells Baruch ben Neriah to write down certain things and go read these words to the people and call for a day of fasting. Vehi b'shana chamishit, it was the 5th year, b'chodesh HaTshi'i, in the 9th month, karu tzom lifnei Adonai, they called for a fast in front of Hashem. Lo lechinam nitchak aviv shel Radak. If you look in the commentary of the Radak there, Rabbi David Kimchi, if you look there, the Radak writes that this literally means a fast day, but then he goes on a whole different explanation from his father. What the word tzom. Tzom comes from tzomet hagidin. Upiresh yom kibbutz mneshon tzomet hagidin. It was a day of gathering, not a day of fasting. Like, what is tzomet hagidin? Do you know what tzomet hagidin is? Have you heard of this concept before? Somebody know a little bit of hichot shchita? In the leg of a chicken, in order for the chicken to actually be kosher, one of the things you have to check for is that tzomet hagidin, that all these, maybe 15 or 16, I don't remember off the top of my head, gidin, tell me a word in English. Sinews.
Sinews, nerve endings.
Yeah, very good. They all have to be intact. They can't be blemished. By the way, it's a problem in modern chicken, kasher chicken. I'm not going to make problems right now, but it's something that is checked. Why? It's called tzomet. Tzomet is in Hebrew today the word the intersection. It's where things intersect. People gather in one place. And so he says it can't be that it's a fast. It must be that it's a tzom, meaning a day of gathering. The father of the Radak could not understand why we would call for a fast day at this point in time. But it says Rabbi Chaim Halevy, nonetheless, all the other commentaries who say that it's a real fast day, they were correct. And because the prophet knew that the people would gather together to fast, but they never followed through with the teshuvah part of the fast, he told his student Baruch ben Neriah everything that he said above, with the hope of, and he's quoting now again from the Navi, Ulai tipol techinatam lifnei Adonai, v'yashuvu ish midarko hara. Maybe their prayers will fall before Hashem, and they will return from their evil ways. Meaning that returning from one's evil ways is what ultimately will cause the gezerah to end, the bad decree to end. It's not the fast on its own. Mikan she'yada hanavi, from here you can see the Navi's skepticism. Maybe Hashem will hear their prayer. Sheyeh zeh tzom shigrati akar lo teshuvah she'eno kol erech. This was going to be another barren, useless fast day, where people were going to fast and nobody was going to do teshuvah. And so he felt that it had no value. Maybe somebody will do teshuvah and Hashem will listen. But for the most part, the Jewish people are used to fasting. It's all about food. It's all about drink. It's all about what it can do. They're not about doing teshuvah. Ma'ata, from now, acharei shnidbarer mimikraot hanan, once we've clarified from the Pesukim above, ma'al kol safek, beyond the reason of a doubt, ki kol tzom kashur hu behechrach el teshuvah, that every fast day is necessarily connected to teshuvah. Nitztarech lomar, we must say, shekasher biksha Esther, when Esther asked the Jewish people, V'tzumu alai sheloshet yamim, fast for me for 3 days. Bli kol teshuvah, she doesn't tell them to do teshuvah. V'gam Mordechai lo karatam l'teshuvah. Even Mordechai did not ask the people to do teshuvah. Harei ze mipnei, page 198, shelo yad'u ba'atzmam shum chet shebiglalo nenshu. The reason why they don't require the nation to do teshuvah, because they are not aware of a chet that would cause the Jewish people to have this tragedy befall them. Because of that, they didn't know what exactly we should be doing teshuvah for. So they called for a fast, but not necessarily for a fast of teshuvah. And Rabbi Chaim Halevy, in the laws of Purim, expands on this idea very much. Why? What's going on here? What could it have been? Why didn't they see what other people saw was going on? V'lachen biksha Esther, and that's why Esther requests, V'tzumu alai, fast for me. V'dok, and you should understand it there. Lachen harambam b'hilchotav kashar tamid et tzom im teshuvah. And that's why if you look in the Rambam's laws of fasts, he always ties the laws of fasting and the laws of teshuvah together. They're always bound up together. The Rambam doesn't separate these two because his natural read of the concept of fasting is always in the context of helping a person do teshuvah. Any questions before we get into the halakha part of this?
No, Rob. Okay.
Aleph, mitzvah aseh min Torah. This is a mitzvah aseh from the Bible. This is straight out of the Rambam. It's a biblical commandment from the Torah. Liz'ok, to cry out, ulhariya, and to blow the shofar, l'hariya b'chatotzot, with trumpets. Al kol tzara shetavo al tzibur, for every calamity that will fall the Jewish people. V'davar zeh bet midachei teshuvahu, and this is one of the ways of teshuvah. Shebizman shetavo tzara, that when tragedy comes to the Jewish people, or crisis comes to the Jewish people, v'yizarku aleh, they will call out to Hashem over it. Yedu hakol shebiglal ma'asehem hara'im hur'a lahem, that this happens to them because of their averot. V'zeh yigrom lahasir hatzara malehem, and this will cause that the tragedy should leave the Jewish people. I want to clarify something that some may not always understand. In the past, you've heard me go on record and say very clearly, nobody should tell you why a certain disaster is happening to the Jewish people. Nobody has the right to say, oh, it's because you do this that this is happening to you. And I still hold with this opinion, absolutely. So what do I do with the Rambam here? The Rambam says that anything bad that happens to a person, anything that happens to a nation, means there's something that nation has to fix. There's something that has to be done better. There is teshuvah that has to be done. What do I categorically reject? I reject the notion that you think, not you, that you think you know exactly why that problem is without you being a prophet who heard it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I reject that 9 times out of 10, the people who tell you what needs to have teshuvah done are never talking about themselves. They're always telling you what teshuvah you have to do to solve the problem everybody else is suffering from. They are never guilty of that teshuvah. So hey, you have to keep Shabbat or else. The people who say that are the ones who keep Shabbat. If you don't cover your hair, if you don't, serve this, you don't, everyone has that, you speak Lashon HaRa, whatever it would be. The people are always preaching to everybody else, never to themselves. On any time of crisis, any time of tragedy. You're living in a time like this now. There's nothing that happens to the world that is not intended to teach Am Yisrael something. Don't pretend to be a prophet. Don't speak for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But between you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, between you and your own life, now is an opportune time to do teshuvah. I don't know what I need to do teshuvah for, or maybe you do know. I don't know what the nation has to do teshuvah for. I'm not going to tell the nation that they're guilty of X, Y, and Z because Hashem didn't speak to me. But I can tell you that I must do my part to solve the problems that the nation is suffering from. And doing teshuvah is what will alleviate the suffering of the world. There's a fine line between that and telling everybody that you know why disaster strikes. If they do not cry and they do not blow the trumpets, this is just one of those things that happens in the world. It's a natural phenomenon. It's happening to us. It's a regular, commonplace occurrence. It happens. Life happens. The world goes crazy. This is a cruel attitude towards life. And it causes people to cling even harder to their evil deeds. You can say, hey, this is what happens. This is the way the world works. If something is going on in the world, it requires that we should do a cheshbon hanefesh. Root recalculation. Where are we headed? What are we doing? What's wrong with Am Yisrael? What's wrong with me? What have I not done? I'm perfect? Yom Kippurim is soon. Do I really think I'm going to walk into Yom Kippurim this year perfect? So maybe it's time now. Maybe I'm getting a head start to do teshuvah already. To just blame everything that happens in the world on it's the way of life. It's the way the world works. There's nothing you can do about it. That is a cruel attitude towards reality, says the Rambam. U'midivrei sofrim. It's from the words of our rabbis, L'hitanot al kol tzara shetavo al hatzibur ad shiruchamu min HaShamayim. Our rabbis instituted that we should fast on every fast day. Every time there's a struggle in the Jewish people, we fast until that struggle goes away. By the way, Rabbi Chaim Halevy here has an interesting note. Whenever the Rambam uses the word midivrei sofrim, it's from the scribes. It doesn't always mean that it's rabbinic. In fact, in this context, for example, it's actually a custom from the prophets. And that every time something happens, the Jewish people should fast and wait and do teshuvah until it passes. And now Rabbi Chaim Halevy steps out of the realm of halakha back into the realm of agadah. In little letters on page 198, the main purpose of the fast, the main goal, is teshuvah. It doesn't make a difference whether you know that these fasts were instituted by our rabbis because of the desecration, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, or it's one of the individual fasts. What is the purpose of fasting tomorrow night just because the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed? So you should sit and sing songs about the Beit HaMikdash and study about the Beit HaMikdash. Why would you fast? The fast was not instituted because of the destruction, a way to commemorate the destruction. The fast was instituted as a way to do teshuvah on a day in which we commemorate the destruction. Even those national fast days are directly connected to this concept of teshuvah. And that's why the Rambam writes in Halakha Hey, and this is something we've read before. Yesh sham yamim. There are days. If I mentioned to you, Rabbi Yosef Kapach writes that this phrase in Hebrew, Yesh sham yamim, is actually a translation of an Arabic phrase that means literally that. There are days. Shekol Yisrael mit'anim bahem mipnei atzarot she'iru bahem. There are days where Am Yisrael fasts because of tragedies that happen on those days. Kedei le'orer halevavot. In order to awaken the hearts, liftuach darchei teshuvah, to open up the paths of teshuvah. V'yeh zeh zikaron le'ma'asenu hara'im, and it will be a memory, a commemoration of our evil deeds in the past. U'ma'aseh avotenu shaya k'ma'asenu atah, and the evil things that our forefathers did that we still do today. the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed for Sinat Chinam. You think that we solved that problem already? We've healed that ill in the Jewish people? So what are we complaining about the destruction for? Like, the purpose of this fast day is not to talk about why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed 2,000 years ago. It's to talk about why the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed today. That's on us. You want to know Sinat Chinam? I'm sorry, my parents are in the class. I don't want to offend them, but it's a true story. Sinat Chinam, I'll share with you a Sinat Chinam that I've experienced in my life. This last week, unfortunately, I had to attend a number of funerals, not just one. And different people, it's a hard time in the world in general. There was a funeral that I went to that was part of the regular San Diego Jewish community. It was quite a large funeral. I normally don't attend such big events, for whatever reasons that you might understand. Especially not funerals. Funerals used to be the last place. People are respectful of funerals. They don't fight with you at funerals. They don't say stupid things to you at funerals. About a year and a half ago, maybe even 2 years ago, I went to a funeral here in San Diego. A childhood friend of mine had lost a parent. And I hadn't been in touch with this person for a very long time. But it was one of the big Batei Knesset here in San Diego. Had a funeral. I said, I'm going to go. I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to stand in the back. And I went. It was about Pesach time. Not this year. And I went to the funeral. And they were doing the part, in the burial where it takes a long time in San Diego for this part of the funeral to happen. Everyone's digging and putting earth on the grave. And someone there noticed me. There may be easily 100, 150 people at this funeral. And someone noticed me and started screaming at me that I should get out of there. Mamash chased me out of the cemetery. In front of a lot of people that you all know. En potzepev, en mitzavtzev. Nobody said anything. So I got up and I left. I ran. I tell you the truth, the guy was quite intimidating. And ever since then, I decided never to come back to a levaya that goes to Batei Knesset. If I don't know that I'm going to be able to go and just stay there, then I don't want to be involved. For what reason? So someone dies. What could you possibly have with me? But this person is not somebody that I know. I don't have any history with them. They know about me from whatever Lashon Hara vines they have here in San Diego. I've never spoken a word to this person in my whole life. So for what reason? Do you know how many times a person just says, listen, I'm in a situation, it is what it is. Who cares? Another person, different Beit Knesset. Who cares? At a levaya, at a funeral? What is it if it is not Sinat Chinam? So for everyone who's going to cry tomorrow night about the Beit HaMikdash being destroyed, about the sins of our forefathers, what about a Beit HaKabayit? Look inside your own home first. I know what I need to do teshuvah for. Before you start telling us what we need to do teshuvah for, maybe you should do teshuvah yourself. Before we start complaining about our forefathers, that what they did wrong, Sinat Chinam that they live, we need to unite, we need to unify, Am Yisrael, all together, blah, 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 yeah. Before you start throwing out these cheap cliches that you've been doing for 2,000 years and hasn't worked, maybe do a real teshuvah. Take it upon yourself to treat Talmidei Chachamim kindly, to treat other Jews who are Yirei Shamayim kindly. I'm not asking you to eat at their homes, and I'm not asking you to marry their kids. That's already too much to ask for a decent person. In today's world, to be decent, you have to... Mamash, it's hard to find a decent person. But at the very least, when somebody comes, you meet somebody in public, just let it go. Shegaram lehem velanu otam atzarot. Says the Rambam, the same things that happen in the second Beit HaMikdash, the word exile for, are the same things that are happening to Am Yisrael right now. So stop focusing on then. Don't deflect. Focus on now. What's the problem now? שבזיכרון דברים אלו נשוב להיטיב. That when we remember these things, we will return back to do teshuvah. See, nobody wants to be in the wrong. Nobody wants to take responsibility for what happens in the world. So what do? We always push it on somebody else. You know why this is happening? Because of them. You know why this is going on? Because of them. Instead of blaming everybody for what's going on, look at ourselves. Are we contributing anything? Okay, maybe we're not the biggest problem in the world. Are we contributing anything to this? Mamash today I had someone reach out to me about Reform Jews and them, and they don't keep halakha, blah, 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 blah. And I said, let's slow down. Watch. Well, yes, I'm not a Reform rabbi. What do you... A question I have for you. You're so upset that these Jews don't observe Shulchan Aruch. Let me ask you, should we sit down and make a list between you and me? What parts of Shulchan Aruch you don't keep? The parts of Shulchan Aruch you don't even know? Before you start pointing the finger at all of those people who don't observe Shulchan Aruch, what about you? I'm talking the Orthodox Jewish community. Parts of Shulchan Aruch they don't even know exists. So before you start wagging your finger at other people, why don't they keep Shulchan Aruch? Look, they're destroying Judaism, blah, 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 blah. Why not talk about the way you're destroying Judaism? Fix yourself. I'm not telling you that they're right. I'm telling you they have their own HaKadosh Baruch Hu they're going to have to deal with. But you take care of yourself. There are things that you have to do to fix yourself. Mum shebacha al tomar lechavecha. Rabbis tell us a blemish that you have, don't point it out on somebody else. If you have that blemish, don't look at you. You have the same problem. A person has to think. This year, Tisha B'Av, it's tomorrow. What is it that I need to do teshuvah for? Me, myself, my family, my community. Take care of the things that you can change. And do teshuvah for them. And that's your contribution to the greater well-being of Am Yisrael. And once we've clarified that all of the fats, magamatam, their purpose, היחידה, their sole purpose, היא התשובה, is תשובה, נצביע עתה על הקשר ההגיוני בין צום לבין תשובה בדבר בעל החינוך. He says, let me show you now the בעל החינוך. Who's the בעל החינוך? What is that? What book is that referring to?
Sefer HaChinuch.
Sefer HaChinuch. Now, I know there are different opinions as to who wrote it, but Rabbi Yosef, what is the Sefer HaChinuch?
It's a Catalonian book. It's from northern Spain, I think, and it goes throughout all the parashiot of the Torah, and tells you what mitzvah you can find in that. I think that's the Sefer.
Right. So essentially, it's a running. Sorry. It's a.
Who the author is right now? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Right. So the author is up for grabs. Who actually wrote that book?
They do attribute it to somebody, Rabbi Aaron.
Rabbi Yonatan Halevy, I think they attribute it to.
Yeah.
It's funny because some people say it's Catalonian, a non-Rambamist work. The people who don't like the Rambam say that it's a Rambamist work and not one of their works. It's a very interesting thing.
In his introduction, he says that he relies heavily on the Rambam, the Rif, and I don't remember the third pillar that he uses.
Right. The Sefer Chinuch essentially goes through the weekly Torah portion, through the whole book of the Chumash, and you will learn every one of the 613 mitzvot, where it's recorded, what are the details of that mitzvah, to whom it applies, in which generation it applies, some details, and perhaps a logical reason behind that mitzvah. There have been commentaries written on it, most notably the commentary of the Minchat Chinuch is a famous commentary that is written on it. The Baal Chinuch shares the following thing: mitzvah ta'inui b'yom kippurim, regarding afflicting oneself on Yom Kippurim. Lefi shamachal v'hamishteh, eating and drinking, v'yeter hanaot chush hamishush, and other physical, tangible pleasures, ye'oreru hachomer lihimashech achar ha'ta'ava v'achet. They awaken the body, one's physical body, to go after, to lust after desires and chet. ויבטלו צורת הנפש החכמה מחפש אחר האמת שהיא עבודת האל ומוסרו הטוב והמתוק לכל בר דעת. And it distracts a person. When a person is involved in the pleasures of life, physical pleasures of life, it distracts a person from the goal of searching after the truth, which is the service of Hashem. Umusaro hatov hamatok. This sentence should be put on a bulletin, a poster, what's called a billboard somewhere. The musar, the beautiful and sweet, tov v'hamatok, musar of Hashem. L'chol bar dat, anybody who has a brain. ואין ראוי לעבוד ביום בעול הדין לפני אדוניו, לבוא בנפש מעורבבת מתוך המאכל המשתה בחשכות החומר. It doesn't make sense that a person should come before the judge, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on the day of judgment, is full of meat and wine and bread and all kinds of delicacies and bloated, and it doesn't make sense in the day of judgment that we stand away. שאין דנין את האדם לפי מעשיו שבאותה שעה. We only judge a person based on his actions in that point in time. על כן טוב לו להגביר נפש החכמה ולהכניע חומר לפניה באותו היום. You see in a lot of the writings of the Rishonim this term nefesh chachama, the soul of intellect. It's not just a stupid soul, it's a smart soul. It's a good thing for a person to make their soul have control over their body on that day. למען תהיה ראויה ונכונה לקבל כפרתה ולא ימנעה מסך התאוות. And a person shouldn't be held back or distracted from connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of something else that's going on in their body that would hold them back from this. We're going to discuss soon about afflicting oneself and Jewish traditions' attitudes towards such things. We didn't get there yet. But at this point in time, the Sefer Chinuch says, when a person is full of food, when a person drank a lot, when a person ate a lot, when a person is involved in all the other pleasures of the world, they have a very hard time focusing on anything, let alone on things that are Torah, things that are connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are times where a person just needs to be focused. I'll give you an example. You may see people that are staying up all night cramming for some college paper, or people that are studying for some test, getting ready for that, and you'll see that, or they have a big meeting or a job interview, whatever it will be. So you have people that will, until they get that over with, whatever it will be, they don't eat. They don't drink. They're just focused on what they need to be doing. Any deviation will make them tired, will make them full, they don't do it. I'll tell you, for example, my wife and I plan differently when we go on trips and airplanes. I always get nervous for flights. Is everything ready? You have the passports. You have all the things that you need to figure out. And mamash, it could be that from when I wake up in the morning until I put on tefillin, and after that, I don't eat, I don't drink, I don't do anything until I'm sitting in my chair on the plane. I just can't. I can't for one moment think about doing something else. My wife, Baruch Hashem, go to Starbucks, get a coffee, maybe something to eat, maybe sit down, look out the window. I can't relax until I'm where I am. I understand very much this reason of fasting on Yom Kippurim. In order to be able to be completely present, one has to be able to be completely present without any distractions. Now, by the way, even if you don't agree that this is the reason for why we fast on Yom Kippurim, you still have to fast on Yom Kippurim. Sefer Chinuch is not telling you why HaKadosh Baruch Hu told you to fast on Yom Kippurim. Sefer Chinuch is only telling you a logical reason that you can think about of why you're fasting on Yom Kippurim. But this is not HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking. It's very important that we don't ever get carried away by the reasons of mitzvot to think, well, I can accomplish that level of focus even by eating and drinking. In fact, I focus more on a full belly, so I'm going to eat breakfast on Yom Kippurim. That doesn't make a difference what you think or don't think. The mitzvah, the obligation is still to fast. There's a prohibition of eating. There is no spirit of the law here that will overcome the actual law. But rather, the Sefer Chinuch is trying to give you a logical understanding for why it is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu may have told us to do this. The Hebrew word for a reason, anyone know? The reason why I did something.
Siba.
Siba, the reason, very good. On the other hand, there's a word in Hebrew that we use when we give for the reasons of mitzvot. We don't call a tam, very good, tam. What does tam mean?
Flavor.
Flavor, everybody, my grandmother used to say, Alei Shalom, Savta Chana used to always say, Al tam vareach en ma lidvakeach. About flavor and smell, there's nothing to argue about. Everybody likes different things. When did I used to tell her? She would always come around the table to put lemon in my fish. And I have a hard enough time eating fish, let alone with lemon. I don't want lemon in my fish. But everybody else seems to like lemon in their fish. And I would tell her, Savta, I don't want lemon in my fish. People would say, come on, you can't eat a fish without lemon. It smells without a lemon, whatever people would say. And my grandma used to always say, Al tam varech en ma lidvakech. You can't argue about smell or taste. What some people like to eat, other people don't like to eat. What some people enjoy smelling, other people don't like smelling. Everybody has their own taste. The same thing is true with Tamei Mitzvot. You can't actually know the reason for why HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to do something. But we can come up with a taste, a subjective flavor, a reason for why I do this. Why it makes sense to me to do this. It doesn't displace the mitzvah if that reason doesn't apply. So imagine if someone says, well, we wear tzitziot because of Jewish pride. I heard someone say, we want to show off our Jewish pride to the world. So the natural reaction of somebody there was, great, well, that's why I wear a Star of David necklace. I don't need tzitzit. It has nothing to do with anything. First of all, I'm not even sure where they reached the conclusion that tzitziot is to show Jewish pride. But let's say they were right. That's the tam for their mitzvah. The danger of saying a tam is that someone is going to reach that exact conclusion. Well, who needs the tzitzit? I have a Star of David necklace. So now we have to really deal with the real question. Does a Kadosh Baruch Hu even like the fact that people fast or afflict their souls? Is it frowned upon in Judaism to fast, to afflict one's soul? Or is it something that Am Yisrael does because that's what a Kadosh Baruch Hu likes? And I'm sure that we've all heard different things. So let's make order of all of those things that we've heard, because there are conflicting things that we know. Some are just conflicting because they come from different Jewish traditions. But I believe that Rabbi Chaim Halevy is going to give us the most balanced approach to this question. Torah Adonai, the Torah of Hashem, kava'a yom echad b'shana bilvad letzom u'tshuva, only established one day for fasting and teshuvah, Yom Kippurim. Parat lezeh, aside for that, Lachotim mezid hanisha b'malkot. Somebody who did an avera intentionally is punished with lashes. Lachotim shogeg, and someone did it unintentionally, korban kapara, they offer a sacrifice in vidui dvarim with a verbal confession. Achlo matzanu tzom. But you don't find in the Torah that one of the ways to do teshuvah for something is, hey, I'll skip the lashes, I'll do a fast day today. You don't find this in the Torah. Umikan she'atshuvah ha'ikarit. And from here you learn that the main teshuvah, parat liyom kippurim, aside from Yom Kippurim, ena zikuka letzom dafka, does not require fasting at all. So whereas a fast day requires teshuvah, teshuvah does not require a fast day. The only time where teshuvah requires a fast day is on Yom Kippurim. That's what the Torah says. The rest of the year you are welcome to do teshuvah without fasting. But because the Torah stuck together, give me a better word in English, joined Yom Kippurim, attached, very good, Yom Kippurim with the fast, there developed a logical and natural connection between fasting and teshuvah. Even for an individual who wants to fast for his own personal averot, or a community is found in a time of tragedy, and he realizes, hey, this may be happening to me because of averot that I did. By the way, we are taught to frown upon such a mentality, but really it's not true. For a person to be self-aware is a highly important, it's a very important Jewish value. To be aware. I know what I do wrong. I know what my averot are. I know what I'm not good at. I know what I need to do teshuvah for. If you ask a person, what do you need to do teshuvah for? Don't tell me, but can you think, because you shouldn't tell a person what you need to do teshuvah for. Don't share with people your chatayim. Especially in a world today where people will judge you because you're chatayim. I saw a license plate frame here in San Diego. It said, don't hate me because I sin differently than you. It's a very wise phrase. But if you ask a person, is there anything you need to do teshuvah for Yom Kippurim? They tell you no, run away from them like fire. Everybody has a en tzaddik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yichada. There's no righteous person on earth that does not do chatayim. So when I think about what are my shortcomings, I have to do teshuvah for that. Umitaneh kedei lachzor b'teshuvah, and I fast in order to do teshuvah. אלא שאין להתעלם מכך שתורה עצמה הסתפקה ביום צום אחד בלבד. we cannot deny and we cannot hide ourselves from the fact that the Torah itself only required one fast day for teshuvah, and there must be a reason for that. We're adding more, but the Torah clearly only felt that one was sufficient. V'rabotenu samu libam lazen, and our rabbis, they paid attention to this. Umatzu b'chuchmat Adonai asher b'libam et shvil zahav, and our rabbis, in their great wisdom, always found the golden road, which is the road of balance. If you would tell somebody what are the rabbis, what are their greatest contribution to Judaism, people will tell you all kinds of things. I think very few are so aware of the text of the rabbis to realize that what the rabbis brought to Judaism is balance. That's their greatest contribution. It's the Shvil HaZahav. Our rabbis balanced Torah for us. And here's an example of a balanced conversation surrounding fasting. This all comes out of Masechet Ta'anit. If you want to look up the original, you can go to Sefaria, Masechet Ta'anit, and page 11. Amar Shemuel. Shemuel says, Kol hayoshev b'ta'anit nikra chote. Anyone who fasts is considered a sinner, a chote. Shene'emar legatzez v'chiper alav ma'asher chata la'nefesh. This is talking about the Nazir. And the Kohen does teshuvah for the sin that he did against the soul. V'chibezo nefesh chata ela shetzi'er atzmo min hayayin v'nikra chote. The rabbis say, which chet did he do? Who did he hurt, the Nazir? He just stayed away from wine. Who did he hurt? The fact that he hurt himself by staying away from enjoying this world is the chet that he's guilty of. Hamitzaer atzmo mikol davar al achat kama v'kama, says Shemuel, and therefore somebody who abstains from things in the world that are permitted to them, how much more so are they considered chotim? Are they considered sinners? If a Kadosh Baruch Hu allowed you to drink wine, not to get drunk, to drink wine, to enjoy this, why would you deny yourself something a Kadosh Baruch Hu allows? Unless you are a choteh. It's a chet to hurt yourself that way. And therefore Shemuel says that somebody who chooses to be in a fast is hurting himself. And because of that, he's a choteh. Rabbi Eliezer Amar. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, slow down. You know what? A person who fasts, nikra kadosh, is considered a holy person. So now this is one of those classic cases where you can't reconcile these two, at least not up front. One is saying that anyone who fasts is called a sinner, and one is saying anybody who fasts is called a saint, for borrowing some Christian words here. Shneimar kadosh yeh gadel per asar rosho, he will be holy when he grows out his hair. It's a nazir. Uma ze shelo tzier atzmo ela midavar echad nikra kadosh. So how, when you see this person abstains from only one thing, from getting haircuts, he's called holy? The person who abstains from everything, how much more so they will be called holy? So Shemuel and Rabbi Eliezer are on a clear collision course. V'hamar Rabbi Elazar, but then Rabbi Elazar say, Le'olam yimod adam ki'ilu kadosh sharui b'toch me'av, that a person should always consider themselves as if there is holiness in their body. Meaning what? Rabbi Chaim explains, Ki'ilu kol me'av kedoshim v'asur nachalisham, k'lomar asur litanot. If a person respects the sanctity of their body, my innards are holy, then I would never fast. Because fasting hurts my body, and my body is holy. And Rabbi Elazar says, therefore, anyone who walks around has to think my body is holy, and therefore taking care of my body is a holy thing. Again, a billboard in every yeshiva across the world. This is not some Greek Hellenist over here. This is one of Chachmei Israel. So what's the difference between Rabbi Eliezer and Shemuel? It all depends on the person. Somebody who can handle fasting, HaKadosh Baruch Hu praises them. And somebody who cannot handle fasting is considered a sinner when they fast. Amar Rav Sheshet. And that's what Rav Sheshet means when he says, Hay bar berav diativ betanita. a student of the Bet Midrash who sits in a fast, lechol kalba shiruteh, a dog should eat his portion of Torah study. Meaning, you're a Talmid Chacham. Involving yourself in abstaining from food means you will be too weak to study Torah. Why are you giving up the study of Torah for fasting? Don't you see the value in your Torah study? And here you have a very unique approach. There are different people in the world. And there are people who going for a few hours without eating or drinking is not a problem at all. And there are some people, by the way, there's this thing nowadays, I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not telling you that it's healthy or not. What I'm just telling you is that it's something that is done. They have this thing they call intermittent fasting. My feeling is, along with many other things I see in the world around me, all kinds of people try to do all kinds of not healthy things to themselves just because they want to reach a certain weight or they want to reach a certain look or whatever else it will be. They could change better things about their life than harsh changes in their reality. But like I said, it's not my expertise. You can talk to Zed afterwards. Nonetheless, what these people who do intermittent fasting are showing you is that they're clearly okay with not eating for 12 hours on end or not eating for 20 hours on end. Something that we've done for a very long time, but they're doing on a regular basis. There are people, though, that they can't. They wake up in the morning, and if they don't eat breakfast, they can't think straight the whole day. Everybody knows who they are. And because of that, every person has to decide how to deal with their body in the way that their body can handle. Most definitely, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not want to see people harm themselves for Him. And this is why you may now begin to understand that our rabbis are adamant that those who are, for medical reasons, should not fast on a fast day, don't fast. Because if you think you're getting extra credit by hurting yourself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to give you any credit at all. If you're not allowed to fast on Yom Kippurim and you fast on Yom Kippurim, you don't get mitzvot for fasting. You get the same as if you were eating when you should be fasting. There's a halakha in the world. We are bound to halakha. We're not bound to our emotions. I was once teaching in Yerushalayim, and somebody was telling me, Rabbi, what do you do if you have a utensil you need to put in the mikveh, and you can't get to a mikveh? Where do you go? I said, you take it to the ocean. I mean, that's the most natural body of water you have near you. No, Rabbi, we can't put our utensils in the ocean. It's a true story. I couldn't make this up. You can't find people this stupid unless you would to create them in the Jewish community. Rabbi, we can't put in the ocean. Why not? Well, the ocean is full of lobsters and shrimp and all kinds of things like that. How can you put your kosher utensils in there? It took me a minute to realize this person was not making fun of me. I mean, they make fun of themselves, but they really weren't intending to be, they weren't mocking anything. And I had to think of an answer. So immediately my reaction was like to hit them on the head. But Raphael always says you have to tell a person it's a good question. And it's a very good question, I said. And everything in the ocean is nullified in 60. So it's okay. Oh, that makes sense. Okay, and then we ended there. Now, the truth is that if anybody would know anything about the halachot of nullification, you can't nullify a whole lobster, even in a million. It doesn't make a difference. But nonetheless, this mentality of, it doesn't feel right to me to put my utensils in the ocean where there are lobsters. It's the same person. It doesn't feel right to me. Look, today, it's mamash today. I belong to a group of, all kinds of groups of kosher things. People add me to these groups, and sometimes if I leave, it'll make a statement. So I just stay and I'm quiet. Mamash, it takes a lot of kochot hanefesh, a lot of strength to be quiet and such things. Somebody was posting, I don't know if I'm not going to speak about any particular hechsher, so don't mention the hechsher. There's a very big wholesale store that sells frozen salmon with a kosher symbol on it. And for whatever reason, there's a batch of this salmon that doesn't have a kosher symbol. This person got very flustered. What do we do? Is the salmon kosher anymore? So they reached out to the kosher certification agency, which said, if it's the same type of salmon, it's the same bag that normally has our certification, it's okay. You can eat that fish without kosher certification. Okay. But this person started complaining. It's not fair. They left us out to dry. What do you mean? It feels so wrong to eat something that doesn't have a kosher symbol on it. But the company told you that it's okay. Yeah, but couldn't they just put their stamp on it? Now let me explain to you how this works. In the world of kosher fish, there are two major opinions among the American kashrut agencies. Those who believe that all fish need fins and scales to be kosher. That's the standard reading of halakha. And then there's one maybe two kosher agencies in this country who believe that any pink-fleshed fish, like salmon, trout, any of those fish don't need scales or fins, because the only pink-fleshed fish of that color that's available in the American market, until China finds a way to make tilapia look like a salmon. It'll happen eventually. But till then, this all pink-fleshed fish can be considered kosher even without fins and scales. And so this person is so sad when the kosher symbol that says that pink-fleshed fish doesn't require supervision. That's why their logo is on all the pink-fleshed fish, because they don't require supervision to put their logo on the package. Now is so distraught that they can't eat the fish unless it has this kosher agency symbol on it. But this kosher agency doesn't even check the fish in the first place. This kosher agency doesn't believe you have. So it's a mental block. People are emotional in their observance and not halachic in their observance. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells you that you don't need to fast, don't try to outdo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Don't fast when you don't need to fast. The other way is also true. There are all kinds of things that people use to get out of fasting. So I always tell you should consult with a medical professional who's a HaShamayim, someone who understands the value of fasting. There are some people who are able to fast, even though a regular doctor might tell them not to. They're not going to be in danger. They're not going to die from fasting. They're not going to reach any state of sakana. But people have to be honest with themselves. Just because I technically can get off of a tzom, does it mean that I should? A person must weigh everything in a balanced way. Mevo'ar, so it's explained from here, Shamitaneh lekaparat chata'av, that someone who fasts to atone for their chet, v'yesh bekocho lisbol ha'ta'anit, and has also the ability to physically sustain a fast, nikra kadosh, is called holy. V'im enot dai bari v'chazak, nikra choteh, and if they're not strong enough to handle a fast, they are considered a choteh, a sinner. V'kach hi gam hamaskana halacha, then if you look in the Shulchan Aruch and the laws of fast, Maran there will say the same exact thing. אלא שמה שכתבו הפוסקים, שכל זה מדובר בתענית ששב מעבירות שאדם דש בעקביו, אבל עוונות ידועים, כמבואר בספרים כמה תעניות צריך להתענות, חייב אפילו שאינו בריא וחזק לסובלם. And that which you find some Chachamim write, this is especially true among the Kabbalistic circles, which Rabbi Chaim David Halevy associates with. Those who write that this only has to do with averot that a person maybe did unintentionally. They can do teshuvah without fasting. But there are certain averot which, according to other chachamim, require a set amount of fast days. Anybody can think of one off the top of their head? A chet that has a set amount of fast days attached to it? I know I have some closet Kabbalists here. Anybody study Tanya ever? Don't worry, that's a rare move for me to quote. Nobody?
I studied many times, yeah.
Okay, so there are some chataim there.
With Rabbi Twersky in Denver, who also is from the lineage of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, but he quoted sources, and every footnote he knew all the sources behind the text. He just didn't read it out verbatim, so he really knew what he was talking about in that book.
Right.
It was much more
in depth in that.
Different points of view on, rather than a politically correct reading of it.
For sure. By the way, if you ever want to read a fascinating study on the history of the Tanya and the compilation of the Tanya as you know it, not the original Tanya, but the Tanya as you know it, I highly suggest, I think his name is Professor Moshe Rossman. He has a book, Search for the Founder of Chassidut, something to that effect. And in the back, he has a whole chapter on the evolution of the Chabad dynasty and how certain books were I don't want to say anything on record, but certain books were conveniently rearranged or omitted things from to make the Chassidut fit whoever was taking over the Chassidut politically, as opposed to who should have been taking over the Chassidut on a spiritual level. But really, it's beyond the scope of my conversation today. But I highly suggest that you involve yourself in reading, and maybe even if you want to Google before you get that book, to just read up on who succeeded the first Rebbe of Chabad, the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Instead of his main student to continue his dynasty, you find that the Chassidut splits into two: those who follow his main student and those who follow his son. and just do your own research. Follow the trail, and you'll see where it will end up. B'ezrat Hashem. Nonetheless, over there, I believe it mentions a certain chet, and it says that according to the Arizal, for that chet, one has to fast 84 days every time they do that chet. And that's why he mentions to give 84 times the amount of money that's tzedakah. It's a very common thing by the Mekubalim. This chet requires X amount of days of fasting. This one requires 84 days. 84 days of fasting? That's months of fasting. For one time you do the chet. So if you do the chet 3 times, forget about it. You could eat next year. Says Rabbi Chaim Halevy, there are those who say that by the fast that have required, by the averot that have required fasting attached to them, you can't get away with just doing teshuvah. Acharei hamechila rabbah, after asking excessive forgiveness from these rabbis, he says, Chiluk zeh, ani yodea ma'ayin lamduhu. I have no idea where these rabbis learned this differentiation from. On the top of page 200, v'divrei hashas en nira mihem shum chiluk. And from the words of the Talmud, it does not seem to be that there's any difference between which type of fast you do and which type of fast you don't do, depending on your health. Umatzanu legadol b'acharonim, and there was a great rabbi among the Charonim, shekatav al kol hataniyot shebisifrei hamusar. He wrote about all of the fasts that you find in the books of Musar. This is none other than the famous Noda Bihuda, a fascinating Talmid Chacham who I suggest reading up about him even tonight. Noda Bihuda was one of the giants of Ashkenaz, and he writes that all of the fasts that you find mentioned in the books of Musar, hem svarot keres belo shoresh. They are, svarot keres are things that come from your belly. Like in English you would probably say, it just came from the hip. Like, not founded on anything, that have no sources in Judaism. Vikara teshuvah hi azivat hachet. And according to halacha, the main part of teshuvah is just leaving the chet. Stop doing chet. That's the main part of teshuvah. V'af shekashe lomar ken l'divrei HaArizal, and even though it's very difficult for me to say this about the Arizal, says Rabbi Chaim Halevy, al kol panim, nonetheless, dat haposkim, according to the poskim, if you want to just leave it at the Kabbalists have their own understanding and the poskim have their own understanding, according to the poskim, she'en kapara lelo ta'anit gam lemi she'eno yachol lesovlam ena niret klal. The poskim who say that unless you fast, you don't get any atonement for your teshuvah, it doesn't make sense at all. And therefore, we reject this notion. By the way, if you do know, I mentioned Chabad, so I want to say something positive about it. The last Lubavitch Rebbe, alav shalom, was very famous. He was a person who fasted a lot. In his personal life, the things that he did in his personal life and in his public life were two very different things. But he was one of the most vocal opponents to the type of Chassidut which involved excessive abstinence and fasting and afflictions. And it was one of his big beliefs was, and it wasn't the only one, there are earlier Hasidic rabbis who believed in this as well, was to avoid the side, and they're Kabbalists at the end of the day, to avoid the side of Kabbalistic tradition that requires any kind of harsh observances on one's body or soul. Nistapek be'ara nosefet. I want to add another note, says Rabbi Chaim Halevy. Ad ko davarenu al hatzom behekser im teshuvah. This is enough what I've said about fasting connected to teshuvah. Ach yesh tam nosaf l'tanit shel kapara. There's another reason that teshuvah, that a fast is connected to atonement. Ukdivrei Rashi al Gemara, like what Rashi says in this Gemara. Nikra kadosh is considered holy b'shvil shemitoch kach mitmarkin avonotav shemitaneh. A person's chataim become erased because they're fasting. V'nira sherotze lomar shebishvil tzar hatanit mitmarkin avonotav. That because of the suffering of the fast, a person's averot are forgiven. V'yesh mi shekatav, and there is someone who writes, and this is the writing of the Chatam Sofer, sheto'elet hasigufim hu lehasir hayisurin b'dei shamayim. The purpose of physical afflictions that the Kabbalists or other Balei Musar suggest is intended to rid oneself of any kind of harsh decrees that were decreed on them from heaven. הנה להבנת הסוגיה שם אין הכרח להבין כפירוש רש"י דווקא, וכבר אפשר לומר שנקרא קדוש, על ידי התענית תשובתו היא מזוקקת ומזוכחת ביותר. You don't have to read the Gemara this way, he says, but rather just that a person fasts and they do teshuvah, and that's what helps them not receive the atonement. ועל כל פנים לא מצאנו, nonetheless we did not find, quote, שתורת משה העבידה אותנו בפרישות. We do not find that the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu demands from us that we should abstain from the world. ואין רוב התענית עבודה למי שתאוותיו חלושות וכוחותיו חלושים וגופו רזה. And the whole concept of fasting is not relevant as teshuvah, is not relevant to a person whose body is weak. אבל טוב שיעדן גופו. To the contrary, says Rabbi Yehuda Halevy in the Kuzari, that a person who's weak serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu by helping his body, by letting his body enjoy. Every person serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu differently. ואף על פי שמצאנו לרבי אלעזר שאמר גדולה תענית יותר מן הצדקה שזה בגופו וזה בממונו, and even though we find from Rabbi Elazar that fasting is greater than tzedakah because fasting afflicts one's body and tzedakah only hurts one's pocket, הלא פשוט שרבי אלעזר לשיטתו במסכת תענית שתענית חשוב כשיכול לסבלו. This is all in accordance with what he said over there in Masechet Ta'anit, meaning that a person who can fast should fast, but if not, tzedakah is the right way to go. Uvaadam bari v'chazak, and a person who is healthy and strong, she'en ha'ta'anit meziko, that a fast does not harm them. V'dai she'gdola ta'anit sheba poresh adam mimachal u'mishteh shem yisod kiyumo v'kocho. It's a good thing for a person who's healthy to be able to abstain from food and drink, which give him strength. Uv'mniatam gam habari chashu inui. And therefore a healthy person feels that suffering of a fast, but it doesn't harm him, more than the feeling of hurt through giving tzedakah. But fasting without giving tzedakah is also not a complete deal. Our rabbis already say in the Gemara, the reward for a fast is the tzedakah that you give on the fast. And that's why we say teshuvah, tefillah, u'tzedakah, ma'avirin et ro'ah gzera. That involving oneself in teshuvah, and tefillah, and tzedakah are the three things we have to, the three boxes we have to tick in order to do teshuvah properly. However, the next part here is all about individual fasts and what people need to fast for and things that people, individual chataim and maybe afflicting oneself with like the rava, not finishing their plate. I don't want to get into these details. I do have just a few more minutes, and with your permission, I would like to fulfill the tradition of our HaShamayim to always end on something good, to always end on a good note. We're talking about fasting and suffering and avonot and Tisha B'Av. Before we go into Tisha B'Av, let's know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel as well. If you turn me to page 207, let's just learn together the last piece about Tu B'Av. And then we'll have a complete package. Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av is the 15th of Av. This is going to be a classic case where Rabbi Chaim David Halevy is going to tell you something you already know, but is going to shed light on it in context. It makes that much more sense when you study Judaism in its proper context. Listen. Nahagu shelo lipol al panehem b'Tu B'Av. The custom is, Maran mentions in Shulchan Aruch, that we don't do tachanunim or nefilat apayim on Tu B'Av. Shanunu, we learn. Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Lo hayu yamim tovim Yisrael. There were no better days for the Jewish people. Ke Tu B'Av, like the 15th of Av, ve'Yom HaKippurim, and Yom HaKippurim. That on both of those days, shebahem benot Yerushalayim, the daughters of Jerusalem, yotzot, they would go out, bichle lavan sheulin, with white clothing, shelo levayesh mishe'eno, they all wore the same clothing. Why? So that nobody would be embarrassed. You couldn't tell who was rich and who was poor, who had designer white clothing and who didn't. It was all the regular, everyone went out in the same clothing. V'cholot b'kramim v'omrot, and they would go dance in the vineyards and they would say, Bachur, young man, sana enecha, lift your eyes, ure mata borer lecha, and tell us which one of us you want to choose as your spouse. Al titen enecha benoi, don't look at the physical beauty. Ten enecha b'mishpacha, look at the family, look at things that are more important than just the physicality that meets the eye. Meaning the daughters of Israel would essentially bear themselves in the sense of first impressions are not what matters. Let's go out, let's go sing and dance in the vineyards. On which days of the year? On Tu B'Av and Yom HaKippurim. I can only imagine this happening in the Jewish community today. The girls all going out of, Beis Yaakov, and all running out into the vineyards and telling all the yeshiva guys to, look at me, which one of me do you want to take home to your parents? Imagine such a thing. Uva Gemara in the Talmud, they already ask, Bishlama Yom Kippurim. We know why they would do this on Yom Kippurim. They would go out and dance in the vineyards on Yom Kippurim. Mishum de'id beslicha u'mchila. It's a happy day because there's forgiveness on Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippurim is a holiday. Yom shenitnu bo luchot acharonot. It's the day where the last tablets were given to the Jewish people. And that's why it's a Yom Tov that the Jewish daughters would go out and celebrate. Ela tu ba'av maihi. But the Chachamim ask, we know why people would go dance on Yom Kippurim, but why would someone go dance on Tu B'Av? The kind of Yom Kippurim that Jews observe today does not make any sense that people would go dance in it. Especially if you belong to certain communities. By our tefillah, it's amusing. People are trying to be very serious because they're taught that in Yom Kippurim you have to be very scared and fearful of judgment. But all of the tunes that our Chachamim gave for Yom Kippurim don't match that mentality that is not ours in the first place. Think about Slichot. Slichot would sound much better if you would have some bongo drums, a darbuka, maybe a oud going along with it. Think about the songs. Imagine. Ben Adam alecha nirdam kum kera betachanunim. Even in Yerushalayim, they sing that a little bit different, faster. Ben Adam alecha nirdam kum kera betachanunim shevor sicha deosenicha. Or think about you're getting up right before tachanunim. You're about to בזוכי על משכבי זדון ליבי ושמה וקומה ואבוה. The whole tune here, right before Ne'ilah. It's everyone else, they're crying their eyes out. And we get up, Eno Alila, Eno Alila. From the tunes of the tefillah, our Chachamim are conveying to us what the spirit of a room should be when we reach a time of teshuvah. Now, I've told you before, I'm not taking away from the communities who the way that they do Tisha B'Av, Yom Kippurim is through some heart-wrenching melodies that are full of remorse, and there's a place for that. Not in our tradition per se, but in their tradition most certainly. Yom Kippurim is a holiday, of course. But what about Tu B'Av? What is Tu B'Av? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Yom Shehuturu Hashvatim Lavo Ze Bazeh. This was the day where all the tribes were allowed to intermarry with each other. Sephardim and Ashkenazim could finally marry each other. Rav Yosef Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Yosef says the name of Rav Nachman. Yom Shehutar Shevet Binyamin Lavo B'Kahal. It's the day, if you remember, in the book of Shoftim, it's the day when the tribe of Binyamin was allowed to remarry the Jewish people again. Rabba Bar Chana Amar V'Chanan Yom Shekalu Matei Midbar. It's the day that those who died in the desert stopped dying on Tu B'Av. Ula Amar Yom Shebitel Hoshea ben Elah. Who was Hoshea ben Elah? You know? He was one of the kings of Israel. Not necessarily a great king, by the way, at least at the beginning of his life. Yom Shebitel Hoshea ben Elah Prosdiot Shehoshiv Yeravam ben Nevat Al Hadrachim Shlo Yalu Yisrael Haregel. Yerovam, he made guards along the road to Jerusalem so the Jews couldn't go up to Jerusalem to pray there. And Hoshea ben Elah, he got rid of those guards, and on Tu B'Av was the first day the Jews were finally able to go up to Yerushalayim. Rav Matna Amar, Yom Shenitnu Matei Betar Nikvura. It's the day that after the massacre of the Betar, when the Romans massacred us in Betar, it was the day that finally we were able to bury those bodies. For all of these reasons above, Lachen Haya Yom Tu B'Av L'Yisrael Ki Yom Tov. Tu B'Av was always referred to as a holiday. V'yatzu bo habanot lecholel b'kramim kol Yom Kippurim. And therefore the daughters of Israel went out to dance on Tu B'Av in a similar way that they danced on Yom Kippurim. Agav. He says, now, as a side note, Niva'er kan ha'ara mefursemet sherabim amdu alha. He says, let me please explain to you the answer to a question that many people have. HaKetzad, how can it be? Yom HaKippurim, Yom Mechila Uslicha, Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement, Ma makom latzed b'mecholot. How does it fit into the context of Yom Kippurim to go dancing with boys and girls in the vineyards on Yom Kippurim? It's a day you're supposed to be in the Beit HaKnesset, asking Mechila. והיו שהוציאו המשנה מפשוטה וביאוה בדרך אלגורית. There are some that try to explain this Mishnah in allegorical terms, not the way that it's actually written. V'Rav Shrer HaGaon u'bno HaRav Hai Gaon, both Rav Shrer HaGaon and the son of Hai Gaon, Pirshu She'amur b'Mishnah, they have a unique explanation that when it says they went out to dance, Eno Musav El al Tu B'Av Bilvad, is only referring to Tu B'Av. Ve'en mashlitim Yetzer Hara b'Yom HaKippurim, and that we would never do something which would awake the Yetzer Hara in Yom HaKippurim. So the Geonim already are reading this Mishnah. They're forcing the reading of the Mishnah to say it's not referring to Yom HaKippurim, only to Tu B'Av. We just mentioned that those were 2 happy days, and on Tu B'Av everyone went out to go dance. That seems to be, by the way most people want to understand this Mishnah. But after I asked forgiveness from them, that's not what the Gemara seems to understand. Said, if you want to understand my opinion, Rabbi Chaim David Halevy always complains about the fact that Jewish people understand the context of halakha and Jewish tradition through the lens of their own exile. They don't know what it really meant originally, kind of like Sfirat HaOmer. Sfirat HaOmer today, everyone knows it as a time of mourning. But Rabbi Chaim David Halevy says, listen, this is not a time of mourning. The Ramban writes that Sfirat HaOmer was one long holiday. All of the grains the farmers were keeping in their storehouses, finally they could eat. Finally they could sell. People would come to the Beit HaMikdash and celebrate. So how did days of joy turn into days of mourning? That everybody, Sfirat HaOmer is a time of no music, no haircuts, no marriage. How did that happen? Rabbi Chaim David Halevy says that Yom HaAtzmaut, Yom Yerushalayim, the celebrations in Sfirat HaOmer are HaKadosh Baruch Hu's way of reclaiming some holidays in the time that he intended to be a holiday, and the Jewish people transformed into a time of mourning. When you read Torah out of context, it's always going to be out of context. It says, after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, Yom HaKippurim received the kind of flavor that we're familiar with it today. Kasher haya le'en machmad kol ayin, ve'en mikdash, ve'en kohen gadol shechaber ba'adenu. We didn't have a Beit HaMikdash, we didn't have a Kohen Gadol. Yom HaKippurim became a sad day. It's a day where we can only recall how we used to do this in Yerushalayim. But in the days the Beit HaMikdash stood, Haya Yom HaKippurim be'emet Yom Gadol shesimcha. Yom HaKippurim was one of the happiest days in the calendar. Al HaKapara v'aslicha hamuftachim ba'avodat Adonai b'Beit Mikdasho. The Jewish people came out of the service of Yom HaKippurim not thinking maybe Hashem has accepted our teshuvah. They knew that HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepted our teshuvah. There were signs that HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepted our teshuvah. And that's why Yom HaKippurim was celebrated as a holiday before the Jewish people went into exile. And that's exactly what the Gemara means when above we just read, Bishlama Yom HaKippurim. We know why they would celebrate on Yom HaKippurim, but why would they celebrate on Tu B'Av? Says Rabbi Chaim David Halevy, that's the reason why the Gemara asked that question. In the Gemara's head, of course Yom HaKippurim is a holiday. It's Tu B'Av that we don't know what that calendar, what the day is all about. But when you read the halakha or the Mishnah or the Talmud in an exile mode, you read it in, we're living after the Chuban, so Yom HaKippurim is the day where we think about the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom HaKippurim. Well then of course you're going to have a hard time reconciling the two of them. One last point, if I can do this before we end for the night. Rabbi Chaim Halevy addresses the question that I brought up in the beginning. What about tznius, pritzos? What about the modesty of the Jewish people here? The boys and the girls dancing. Come on, what is this? Was there a Shmirah patrol over there? Or were they walking? Who was there? What were they doing? So he says here, Yom HaKippurim, Hayom HaKadosh B'yoter B'mei HaShana, on page 208. Yom HaKippurim is the holiest day of the calendar. Yom Teshuvah, Mechila, Slicha, V'Kapara. V'lavshu bo bigdei lavan, they wore white clothing, lamed ki Yetzer Hara mesulak mihem, to symbolize that the Yetzer Hara, this is the Ritba over there in the Gemara, the Yetzer Hara is not there. Today we're pure. Shehem nekiim. I wonder if this is the real source for why we wear white on Yom HaKippurim, by the way. Shehem nekiim michet kamur b'chol et yu b'gedecha levanim. That they were showing that we're clean of sin. Today, if we're going out and dancing, boys and girls, we're doing it out of pure motives. We're doing it out of holy intentions. V'zeh, this is the reason Shamru Habanot. This is why the girls said to the boys, Bachur, Sana enecha, lift your eyes. V'lo yu choshishin Yetzer Hara. They weren't worried about Yetzer Hara. They weren't worried about people doing improper things, because the only people who would dare do such a thing on Yom HaKippurim are people who are doing it for holy reasons. It makes our Chachamim upset that there are people who always judge the Jewish people unfavorably. The men and the women are going to mix it. You know what they're going to do when they sit around the table? They're going to... What do you think people do at the wedding when they sit men and women together? When's the last time somebody went to a wedding and they sat next to their wife and their children and the lady across the table, they ran away, I don't know, behind the mechitza to do some avera? When is the last time that happened? Tell me, for the same person who makes me sit separate from my wife at the wedding. That person works a whole day with some 18-year-old secretary who he takes her to lunch, he buys her coffee, she sits in his office. Which chataim he does? For sure chataim he does. Which chataim do I do when I sit with my wife at a wedding? If you want to put up a mechitza, don't put it up at the wedding. Put up a mechitza in your office. You don't say that the Jewish people in Yom Kippurim are going to do chataim. If the Jewish people are doing something in Yom Kippurim, they're doing it out of purity. V'lachen hayu betuchim. The girls trusted. Shabachurim shiatzu lekramim hitkavnu ach bekenut limtso sham benot zug bivad. They knew that the boys that came out to the vineyards were serious. They weren't dating for fun. They were dating for serious reasons. V'ulai shezo kavanat ad braita sham. Maybe that's what the braita means when it says Tanya. Somebody who doesn't have a wife went there. But those who had wives, meaning those who were looking for trouble, didn't go there. It wasn't a place for them. It wasn't a place where promiscuous people went to dance together. It's a beautiful thing that Am Yisrael can do such a thing without supervision, without the need for patrol, a shmira patrol, making sure they're okay, without the need for mechitzot or for sunglasses or whatever other tricks people are doing today. They were able to do something pure with pure motives. Lamdecha, I don't want to finish the rest here for now, but I think this idea is important. You know, I've spoken to you before about Shir HaShirim, and how in today's many Chumashim and Tanakh, they don't translate Shir HaShirim. Why don't they translate Shir HaShirim? It's an inappropriate text. People were going to get the wrong idea out of it. Rabbi Akiva says that this is Shlomo HaMelech. All of Shlomo HaMelech's writings are holy, but Shir HaShirim is the holy of holies. I think ArtScroll has a note there, why they intentionally don't translate the text of Shir HaShirim. It's all about a poem between God and Israel. That may be true in terms of an explanation. But there are words there. There's a love story there between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael that you're not sharing, a very graphic love story. There are body parts involved. There's intimacy involved. Well, Shlomo HaMelech was writing now some inappropriate work. Shlomo HaMelech was bored, so he had to write himself some kind of novel. Nehefech. There was a time where Jewish people lived with their heads outside of the gutter. There was a time where Jewish people were able to think about things that were sexual, things that were intimate, and be able to think holy things, not inappropriate things. One of the greatest signs of our galut is for a Jewish person to be unable to read something like Shir HaShirim the way a pure, holy Jewish person would read it. That's a sign of our galut. It's a sign of our exile. You want to fix our galut? You want to get out of galut? Let's take it upon ourselves to start reading Torah in the proper context. To read Torah the way the Torah was meant to be read. To teach ourselves to reject any of the things. You know, my father always says, there are all kinds of piyutim, all kinds of songs that Chachmei Sfarad write. Think about that. We just sang on Shabbat. Which song I sang on Shabbat? Shalom leven dodi. It's a love song that Hashem and the Jewish people. And what does it say there? Malach yefefiyah utoreri ahava. You beautiful one, please awaken the love. Seduce me, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what is it? Utzaltzeli kolech. And sing your voice. Let it ring like a bell. I want to hear you singing. Kolisha. I don't want to hear a lady singing. In the Judaism you have today, it's so unnatural for what HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended for Am Yisrael. We're living in an unnatural Judaism. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Am Yisrael, I want you. Love me. Show affection towards me. Be intimate with me. To love HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a real love. It's why Rabbi Yonatan Halevy, Rabbi Shlomo ibn Gvirol could write love poems between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You know that since then, if a rabbi today were to write a love poem between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that might be worse than having a forum on the internet saying orange juice is kosher without an OU. If you would write a love poem to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you could be blacklisted forever. How dare you use such vulgar language to describe HaKadosh Baruch Hu? When did Am Yisrael become Roman Catholics? If we're talking about the Roman occupation, we're talking about the Romans who destroyed our Beit HaMikdash. Am Yisrael today is still suffering from a Roman religious occupation of our faith. And it's time for us to break free of those shackles, to learn Torah the way original Jews would have learned Torah, to reconnect with our Chachamim who gave us a Torah Chaim, a Torah which, what we said before, Rabbi Chaim, Rabbi Yonatan Halevy writes, a Torah that does not demand suffering from us, a Torah that demands joy from us, connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu from us. Only if we restore that type of Torah and let the Jewish people know that it's around, that it's alive, will we really be able to go into this Tisha B'Av saying, we did teshuvah for what needs to have teshuvah done. We are ready, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for our redemption. Ata takum terachem Tzion. Come and have compassion, Tzion. Ki et lechenana kiva moed. The time has come, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for you to have compassion on Tzion. I still pray wholeheartedly that from tonight until tomorrow night, B'ezrat Hashem, we will be going straight back to Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, b'mehera b'yameinu, Amen.